or type in slido.com and punch in Revere as the code to access the survey.
All right, moving on to the next one. I have experience.
Like we have a question real quick, Doris.
Yeah,
Sorry, from Brian.
Hi. I'm using my cell phone, so that's why I'm not participating in the voting, because I can't do two things at once on my phone.
Totally okay. Thank you for letting us know, and we'll make sure you have plenty of time. Feel free to raise your hand if you have anything specific that you'd like to ask, and you're more than welcome to unmute and we can chat.
Yeah, because I live on Martin Street, so I know all about the problem that I'm dealing with. 28 years, so all right. So I'll wait to the end to ask the question.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about climate impacts. So one of the impacts of climate change that we expect to see over time, over the next century specifically, is sea level rise. Historically, we have already experienced about 10.4 inches of sea level rise in the Boston Harbor since 1922, and that's what that first point is on the left-hand side. Now, there are different scenarios in which different levels of emissions will affect how sea level rise will change over time. So that's what these different points are with the different shades of blue. But it is most likely that in 2070, there will be about 40 inches of sea level rise that we could see. And it's possible under worst case scenario, we could see up to 7 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. And as you can see here, this is a photo that I'm sure many of you have seen already. It's a pretty popular photo of Winthrop Parkway near Revere Beach, where during high tides, the seawater is already surpassing the barriers that are in place and moving inland. So climate change is also impacting the rainfall and snowfall that we're experiencing. We're starting to experience and will continue to experience reduced summer precipitation and more droughts with impacts to water supplies, as well as an increase in short duration, high intensity rainfall events. And so that's kind of these flash flooding type storms that we see really frequently. So we're seeing increased spans of no rain, and then we're getting a lot of rain at once, which when the soils are dry can cause an increase in runoff in that stormwater, so it's not infiltrating. And this can lead to an assortment of issues as shown here. It can weaken root systems of trees, it can hurt local water supplies, it can damage crops, and increase road pollution in water bodies. Additionally, we're seeing increases in extreme weather patterns, so bigger storms coming more frequently, and that can cause a lot of different problems like economic impacts to disrupting local businesses, disrupting properties and causing damage, and requiring increased infrastructural repair costs for communities. It can also impact areas like Revere specifically by accelerating the erosion of dunes and coastal habitat, and it can even lead to the displacement of residents in coastal communities. So with all of that, we're going to pass it off to Chris so that he can talk a little bit about this project and how Revere is taking action against all of these negative impacts.
Thanks, Doris. All right, so yeah, I guess I'll start off by talking a little bit about Rumney Marsh, which is an area of critical environmental concern in Massachusetts, which is kind of right at the heart of the project area for this project. Rumney Marsh is a salt marsh. Salt marsh is a coastal wetland where seawater flows in and out with the tides, and they provide numerous benefits, including reducing flooding, improving water quality, fostering biodiversity, providing habitat and shelter for birds and animals, as well as sequestering carbon, and recreational activities as well. There's a lot of great recreational opportunities in Rumney Marsh. And I think if we jump into the next slide, we're going to have another quick Slido poll for you asking what recreational activities do you most frequently engage in at Rumney Marsh? Examples could be walking, boating, fishing, bird watching, etc. So I think this poll should be active now. And this will be kind of as you type in your responses, we'll see them pop up. And if you're not aware that you can engage in recreational activities in Rumney Marsh, you can type that in as well if you'd like. I'll give you another minute or so, see if anybody else wants to add to the poll. It looks like the wildlife and walking the trails are pretty common threads in these responses here. So we can move to the next question. And if you do not recreate at Rumney Marsh, what changes would make you visit more often? We'll give you a minute or two to type in some responses to this as well. Give a 30 seconds more or so. Looks like somebody else is typing in now with a response. Nice. All right, seems like eating areas are the clear winner here. All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about tide gates. The general overview of a tide gate is that it's a device used to control water flow in coastal areas where you have an interface between stormwater runoff and seawater. So they essentially open and shut with the tides. There's a few different types, but the general operation is that during low tide, the tide gates open. As the tide starts to come up, it lets some salt water flow up into the drainage area upstream. Once the incoming tide reaches a certain elevation, the tide gate will shut, and it prevents the incoming tide and the salt water from additional flow going upstream into the catchment area. As the tide recedes, then the gate opens back up, and the water that went up into the drainage area can now flow back out freely into the sea. And there's a couple important things to note with tide gates here. So when they're open and the tide's coming in, it allows fish to get up into the upstream tidal marsh, and they close at a certain elevation to prevent too much seawater from going up into the catchment area. And this is important when you have a rainstorm occurring during, or as a high tide's coming in. So it shuts to prevent too much water from coming in, so that you still have storage for the stormwater runoff upstream in your catchment area. Without a tide gate, if the tide was just allowed to flow upstream, the rainwater wouldn't have anywhere to go as it kind of drains down from the upland areas, and you'd have an increase in flooding. If you didn't let the tide in at all, then the upstream salt marsh areas wouldn't receive the saltwater flush that they need to provide a healthy ecosystem for the vegetation, the flora, and the fauna that live in the upstream salt marshes. I guess we can jump to the next slide, please. So, kind of touched on this in general, but why does Revere have tide gates? Stormwater is collected throughout the city. It's carried in pipes underground. These pipes discharge outfalls in various locations, including the one that we are looking at in this project, which is the Martin Street outfall to Rumney Marsh. Revere is a coastal city, and so it needs tide gates to effectively manage stormwater and protect the community from flooding. And without tide gates, tidal flow would inundate the stormwater system, and during storm events at high tide, the stormwater would have nowhere to go and the system would be inundated with salt water. So the tide gates act to essentially, minimize the amount of salt water flow that's coming up into the system and allow for more capacity and storage of the stormwater runoff to kind of sit in the pipes and the structures underground until the tide goes out, and that stormwater runoff's allowed to then discharge into, the ocean or the tidal marsh. So the Martin Street tide gate, the city of Revere is proactively taking steps to address some climate vulnerabilities. Last year, we did the first phase of this project, and that was the Diamond Creek Catchment Improvements Investigation and Assessment Project. And with that, we looked at the whole Diamond Creek catchment area, which is it's the basin upstream of the Martin Street tide gate. It's approximately 574 acres, of which 329 acres is impervious surface areas. So places that when it rains, the water doesn't have any ground to go into, so it's just going to run off until it can find, grass or dirt. At the current time, the tide gate at the Martin Street outfall does not function as it was designed to function. It's currently a self-regulating tide gate that's essentially operated by a buoy system. So as the tide comes up, the buoys start to float, and that closes the tide gate once the tide reaches a certain elevation. As the tide goes back out, the buoys drop down, the gate opens, and the tidal flow that was, able to go up into the upstream area can then flow back out. The tide gate has been stuck both in the open and closed positions, which, depending on the situation, can be problematic. If it's stuck open, too much tidal flow can get up into the catchment area, and if you have a rain event, then that rainwater has nowhere to go. And again, if it's stuck in the closed position and you have a large storm event, there's no way for the stormwater to discharge out into the Rumney Marsh. So in the first project, we looked upstream to identify any areas inland that we could try and remove some stormwater flow through green infrastructure opportunities and ways to address the urban heat island effect in the Diamond Creek catchment area. In this phase of the project, we're looking specifically at the Martin Street tide gate, and we're looking to design and permit an upgraded tide gate that is going to function properly and provide some additional resilience. So this current phase of the project is a 2-year MVP grant. The first phase, the first year of this project, we are doing the preliminary design and kind of the field investigations. And in the second year, we're going to work on advancing the design and working to get permitted through the various different regulatory agencies that have jurisdiction on the project area. And these improvements will help to reduce flooding upstream, as well as help improve conditions in Rumney Marsh, as well as the Central County Ditch Marsh, which is the upstream salt marsh on the catchment side of the tide gate. And I guess at this point, we are going to jump into a couple more Slido polls to gather a little more additional feedback, and then we'll move into some questions. So.
Yeah, and in this scenario as well, if you just want to raise your hand, if you have any questions, we can do that. And if nobody has any questions on how they function or what they are. Yep, Brian?
Hi, I lived here for 28 years and dealt with the floodgate. They've had a problem since I've lived here that they've been working on it with. I used to work for CDM Smith. I don't know if they still work with you guys. I worked with Bob Button, who's an engineer. And we always, every time there's rainstorm, we get seepage in the basement. Some of my neighbors get 5 feet of water in the basement. They were supposed to do something when the floodgate, when it's high tide, and there's a big rainstorm. They said that they were going to have a pump shooting the water over the floodgate so the water doesn't back up into our houses. And also, we were told for 28 years that most of this area gets pumped down to Martin Street and then goes down to the floodgate. So are they gonna do like separate, like each street go down to Hastings and then to the floodgate so we don't get inundated with water on Martin Street? That's my question.
I think I'll already address that.
Brian, I am aware of the issue in the neighborhood. We are expecting, once we fix the tide gate, we were brainstorming and talking about this project, where once we fix the tide gate, we'll be able to grab all those drain pipes in those Martin, Boston, Fairfield Street, because all of those, they don't drain properly onto the marsh, and we'll be able to grab all of those and then bring it to the functioning new tide gate, where this, I think, will resolve the issue out there. So yes, but it's just going to take a little bit of time.
It's been taking 28 years.
We're tired of waiting.
You know, I'm disabled and my mother's elderly, and we can't keep having seepage in the basement. It's too much on us. I've dealt with Nick Wystrom and Bob Button from CDM Smith, and I've talked to all the previous mayors from Haas to, who was the other one? Who was the one before, after Haas? Ambrosino. Okay. I spoke with Ambrosino, Arrigo, and this has been going on 28.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that something could change because
we will look. What is the address that you live on?
7 Martin.
All right. Yes, Brian, we are aware of this issue. I know that it's been going pretty long. Also, just one more thing to mention that I think you are on the flood zone over there. So, you know, in the flood zone, you are expected to, you know, have some drainage issues. As I said, we are trying to fix it where we would grab all the drainage on those pipes that don't properly drain into the marsh and bring it to the new tide gate. Once we have it permitted and designed, I think by fiscal 24, on fiscal 25, we are hopefully trying to start the construction of this tide gate. And once we replace it, once it's all done, then I think the issue should be good. The issue should be all set there in that neighborhood.
We were told we weren't in the flood zone, but you're not required for flood insurance.
Okay.
So
Yeah, we can put
I see.
a link in the chat to the FEMA flood maps if that would be helpful, so that you can check. You can actually add in your address to that application and it'll show you the FEMA flood map, so that might be helpful.
Okay.
Okay. But yes, Brian, we are aware. I took your address and information, and we'll get back to you, and we'll have a bigger discussion on this beyond this meeting.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Chris, do you want to address the question that just came up?
Yeah. So the question is that the gate looks small for the coverage area. So the the conduit connecting the upstream salt marsh, the Central County Ditch Marsh, with the tide gate out to Rumney Marsh is a 5-foot diameter pipe, and the existing tide gate, there's a chamber, and the tide gate itself is, I believe, a 5-foot by 5-foot box. So I think that it looks a little smaller in the picture than it actually is. So I think that might just be, kind of perception.
Yeah, I would agree. As someone who's been out there, it's almost as big as me. So I think it is bigger than it appears out there. And switch over to the next question. And I think basically from what we've been hearing, I think that we're in agreement that tide gates are really important to the safety of the community, as well as the safety of and preservation of existing infrastructure. And then this kind of is a continuation of the bigger conversation of concerns about the impacts of high tide and climate change on the city's infrastructure. Obviously, the city is taking great strides towards making sure the tide gate is repaired and properly maintained. And if anyone else has questions or comments, feel free to either raise your hand using the Teams function or unmute, but we're happy to take those too. Yeah, and I think, speaking about climate change in present scenario and then in future climate scenarios where we're anticipating an increase in those rains, there's a larger conversation that the city is absolutely having about how to slow those rain flows and the runoff, as Chris was mentioning. And one way to do that is through increasing the green spaces and reducing the amount of pavement and developed cover so that rain can infiltrate where it falls rather than picking up speed and pollutants and moving down towards the marsh. And the city is doing their assessments and looking for ways to do that. And there are ways that you can help on your property as well, thinking about pervious surfaces and maybe not paving extensively around your house, and that can help reduce the amount of rainfall as well. All right, we'll move on to the last one. But just looking for anyone to share how you're feeling about the flood vulnerability and infrastructure upgrade information that's been shared today. Okay, so we're feeling okay, some concerns. That's good. I think that's how we're all feeling generally with this in all respects. But I'm glad to see not too many overwhelmed. With that, I'll let Chris close it out, but just want to say thank you everyone for coming today. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to the, excuse me, flip forward one too early, reach out to the engineering department or to Chris and myself. I'll put our emails in the chat, but feel free to reach out regarding the project.
Yeah, and so at this point we can kind of, open up to general, Q&A if you have any additional questions. Like Dora said, she's putting our email addresses in the chat. Feel free to reach out to either of us. We do appreciate you all taking time out to join in this call and learn about the project. And we'd be happy to answer any additional questions, kind of project specific, if you have any, or, otherwise we'll do our best to field your questions.
Brian, I just wanted to follow up on the issue. I just checked. Yes, you are not on the flood zone. Though I just checked, I see that your property is 100% paved and impervious surface. So that could be one of the issues, because if you're not in the flood zone, I think that's the only other issue I would see why the water is getting into the basement. But we can have a bigger discussion if you want to come by the engineering department, and we definitely want to help the residents and help solve some of the issues there. But
my lot is small. You could only do so much with it,
Yes. Yep. So
they're all squished in the houses. So
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, Chris, you want to close us out here?
Yeah. So again, thank you all for taking the time to join in on this presentation. You've got, let me go ahead and I'll add my email address if anybody thinks of any other questions. Once we log off from here, we do have a feedback survey if people are interested. We've got a QR code if you've got a device you can use to scan that. In addition, we've got the URL posted here. You could tap on that if you're joining from your phone, copy the link, drop it in a browser. Just some additional, questions related, specific to the project, as well as kind of climate change in general and, Revere specific to flooding. And like we said, this is a project that's being funded by the MVP program. It's a 2-year project where the end of the first year of the project is going to be June 30th of 2024. So we're going to continue working on this, and we understand the concerns, and we are all experiencing this increase in the intensity, duration, and frequency of precipitation. And we're here to try and help and answer any questions that you have and hear your concerns. Thank you again for joining. Please speak up, raise your hand, go off mute, or type something in the chat if you do have any other questions at this point. Give you another minute or so to see if anybody's got anything else. Like we said at the beginning, we are recording this, and so if anybody needs a translated version we should be able to accommodate that in Arabic, Chinese, Portuguese, or Spanish. Feel free to reach out to myself or Doris if you'd like a copy of the presentation or a translated version, and we should be able to accommodate that.
And one last thing is you can keep tabs on these projects on the City of Revere Engineering Department website, as well as other projects that the engineering department is doing and that the planning department is doing. So I'd encourage you, if you have any specific questions about other projects that are going on in the city, they have a great website that has a lot of different links and resources.
Yeah, and I guess, one more thing on that note, I'll drop the engineering website into the chat, so that's the kind of at your fingertips. And the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program is a great website, a lot of resources and a lot of information there as well. Just drop that link into the chat if anybody wants to learn more about the overall program in general, what different types of projects are being funded, what different types of projects are actively ongoing.
Yes, and Michelle just put a question in the chat. Will there be other opportunities or events to ask questions and get information? We will have a tabling event this spring. So as the project moves forward, there'll be an opportunity to come out and chat with us, to be determined on where and when it will be. But if you registered through the Eventbrite link, we have your email, so we'll let you know where and when we will be out so that you can stop by.
And if you did not register and we don't have your email, if you want to send it to either of us, we'll take that down. So we make sure to reach out. If you don't want to send us your email, but you do want to know what's going on, feel free to just, check back on the engineering website, because we will post, we'll post there about the next event and additional opportunities to, ask questions, come out, learn more about the project, get status updates, and for the upcoming event, we'll also, the City of Revere will post it on their Facebook account. So we try a few different ways to kind of get the word out for people to know about upcoming events.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time tonight.
Right. Thank you all so much. Hope everybody has a good night. And feel free to reach out if you think of anything after we log off here.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your participation on this meeting. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.